Basket weaving art has for centuries been at the heart of Wabanaki culture and lifeways, centered around the crafting of materials from sweetgrass and black or brown ash tree. The skill of pounding in the ash sections and shaping strips for baskets is an amazing process, as I witnessed recently at the Winter Festival of Wabanaki Art in Orono. In recent decades, the beauty of Wabanaki basketry has been more and more recognized in the broader art community and collected as an important art form in many museums, such as the Hood Museum in Dartmouth, the Bowdoin College Art Museum, University of Delaware Museum, and the Farnsworth Art Museum. And now recently, in 2022, the Portland Museum of Art has done a special exhibit on Wabanaki basket weaving, an exhibit that featured the fine artistry of tonight's speaker, the Penobscot Nation basket weaver, Sarah Sockbeson. Sarah is regularly active in festival expositions of Wabanaki art, as in Orono's Winter Festival, and now this past weekend at College of Atlantic in the Dawnland Festival in Bar Harbor, where Sarah gave weaving demonstrations and exhibited her recent pieces. Her work has won several awards. In 2022, Sarah was awarded a senior fellowship at the Lunder Institute for American Art at Colby. In 2020, in Portland, the Kindling Fund, as part of the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Arts, awarded Sarah a Kindling Fund grant to pursue new forms of basketry art. Her work continues on exhibit at Colby Museum of Art, at the Hudson Museum at University of Maine Orono, at the Portland Museum of Art, and at the Abbey Museum, as well as in many distinguished private collections. So we are especially pleased to host tonight's speaker, the basketry artist, Sarah Sockbeson.
Can you hear me okay? Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to show you kind of a glimpse into what I do as a Penobscot ash and sweetgrass basket maker. We'll see if we can get the technology to work. Hopefully. There we go. There we go. So this is kind of an example of some of my more contemporary works. And I have brought a little selection, what I had left over from the show, which actually I would say in terms of what's here on the table, none of this was at the show, except for one piece, and they are not currently available, but so what I have here is kind of a little example of my work, which are these two, and then these three are works in progress, and then the other three are works by other artists that I had with me. And so I hoped to show you more pieces in person, but I didn't really have much left over after the show, so I can't complain about that. So I also brought a little bit of sweetgrass if you want to see that or smell that. It has a great smell. So a little bit about me. I grew up actually in Brooklyn, so not too far away. Half of my family was from Penobscot, Indian Island, from the Penobscot Nation, and so half of my family lived in the Old Town area, and then the other half of my family were the first settlers of Fly Point in Brooklyn. And so I have really deep connections on both sides of my family to kind of the coastal area of Maine, and just always look for excuses to come back and be near the ocean. It's just, my favorite place to be. So I grew up kind of surrounded by culture. I was born on Indian Island, and I kind of saw culturally a lot of baskets in the homes of family members. We had drumming, beadwork, things like that. But a lot of the art forms that we see today were carried on by a very small number of community members, and there are like specifically areas of culture that not everybody did carry on the knowledge. And so in our earlier years with basketry, we have birch bark, and you might recognize this birch bark canoe. And so some of our earlier works incorporated birch bark, spruce root, and for Penobscot people, those materials were especially important because we were a river type of people that traveled a lot by water, so that water and the rivers were like our highways. And so this is a really beautiful example of the craftsmanship that went into birch bark canoe making. And so we would practice birch bark basketry not only as a container, a gathering container, but also moose calls and the other thing I'm thinking of, wigwams. Wigwams were a major staple in everyday living as Penobscot people, and they were constructed of birch bark, different saplings, and then cedars or spruce root to lash all of the edges together. And so a lot of the materials that I was familiar with culturally growing up was birch bark, cedar, spruce root, and of course ash and sweetgrass. And so a lot of our baskets in pre-contact were gathering utilitarian style pieces. They were larger scale than what you see today. So pack baskets, and this is a great example of a potato basket. Later on was a staple in gathering potatoes up north. And then during the Victorian era is sort of when we see the baskets start to shrink down, become smaller, and cater to more of a tourist market. And so I think they kind of evolved from something that was used every day to something more ornate, something more decorative. And in that process, I think a lot of the basket weavers were really inspired by their time and by just decorative things of the Victorian era. And so you can really see that work even in the older pieces, where you can see a relation to some of the decorative items that were available during that time period. But we also used basswood fibers as well, and that was sort of a type of fiber that could be woven, because basswood, once it's processed, it becomes very, very fibrous and can be twined and made into cordage. And so that was made into like bags like the one you see here. This was a very old bag that either the Hudson Museum or our tribal museum was able to reacquire from a collection not too long ago. And so growing up within my family, I didn't actually have anyone within my immediate family that was a basket maker. I would see the baskets within my homes of my family members, and I knew that my grandmother would tell me stories about her mother who wove baskets. So this is a picture of my grandmother and I, and so she would always tell me growing up that her mother made baskets, and she said that she would make baskets with her or help her. And so after I graduated high school, I moved to Orono, or to Indian Island, specifically to attend school at UMO. And when I was living with my grandmother, because I was right after my grandfather passed, I started to get to know her in my adult years and wanted to know more about her history, how she grew up, and about her experience living on Indian Island as a child. And so I just kind of we spent a lot of time together, and I just gradually unearthed kind of her history, which I found really fascinating. And so she would tell me stories of how she used to help her grandmother, or her mother, and her mother made a living in the early 1900s making baskets. And so this is her mother on this side, on the left, and then on the right is actually her husband, which was my grandfather. His mother or grandmother, his grandmother also was a basket maker. So I found out that I had that lineage from both sides on my dad's side of the family. And so I thought, well, this would be great for me to go gather some materials and bring this home, and maybe she can teach me. And so I ended up gathering the materials from a local person who pounded ash and bought the materials, brought it home, but unfortunately she couldn't remember all of the steps involved to truly like craft a basket from start to finish. And so even though she helped her mother, it was more for very specific steps, and so she didn't know and have like the whole entire knowledge to teach. So that's when I sought out someone else in our community, which was the Maine Basket, it was community members that were a part of the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance. And so I did an apprenticeship with Jennifer Sapiel here. And so she was taught by Teresa Secord, and Teresa was actually one of the people who founded the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance in the early 90s. She kind of moved home after working in, she was a geologist and traveled the country and worked with like oil companies and things like that. And so she kind of wanted to make a big change and come back home and start absorbing more information having to do with culture and kind of separate herself from the work that she was doing. So when she moved home, she noticed that there was fewer and fewer basket makers, and within our community, the average age of a basket maker was 60 years old. So when she noticed that there was this really a significant decline in the number of basket makers and then the average age, she knew that she had to do something, or felt like prompted to begin learning to weave herself. And so that's sort of when she started to get involved with the community, and she studied under one of our elders, Madeline Shea. And so through the course of the work that the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance has done, they've actually lowered the average age of a basket maker to 40 years old. And although they aren't as active anymore, they still have made huge progress in the number of apprenticeships, in perpetuating specifically basketry and other cultural art forms. And they were also responsible for some of our larger shows and markets and opportunities to interact and interface with the public through selling our work. And so since I've learned how to make baskets, I've pretty much nonstop just been on that path, trying to learn and perfect my own, skills, and honing in on the traditional techniques. And I think once after I had like a really solid foundation and all of the traditional knowledge, then I was able to kind of branch out and do my own thing and start experimenting. And so I have since then kind of made a lot of baskets, but also like I can't even count the number. But I've made a living making baskets, and that's probably my primary profession. But I also am working on some other projects, which I'll get to later. But one of the things I noticed just when interacting with the public was a lot of people would appreciate the baskets and think they were beautiful, but a lot of people didn't know what went into making the baskets and kind of all of the steps and processes involved. And so within, like culturally, ash and sweetgrass are both very important cultural elements and important materials, not only for basketry, but for other purposes. And so sweetgrass in particular is one of the 4 sacred medicines believed culturally to hold, special sacred purposes and reverence. And so for me, I use it in my basketry and also for different practices that I do. And when I harvest sweetgrass, it's usually only available and in season in the summer. So I travel to the coast and get an opportunity to stay there while I harvest. And I usually gather just enough to be what I need for the year. And then I will process the grass, pick through it. I carefully pick it each blade at a time when I go and harvest, and then I hang it and dry it, and then that will last me the whole year. And so more recently, we discovered sweetgrass was growing in the national park and over in a few different areas within Acadia. And so we started, Suzanne Greenlaw, pictured here, she started working with the National Park Service and thinking about how we can she was also a biologist and studying plants and things like that, and was a PhD student at UMO when she started this project working with the parks to potentially gain access to sweetgrass again, because sweetgrass is very scarce and it only grows in very specific locations and under it requires a certain type of environment. So when she started working with the Park Service, basically there was a huge long list of criteria in order to potentially even consider gaining access back to harvest for cultural practices. And so you had to meet all this criteria and do a impact study. So any plant, or as you know, within the Park Service, every plant, you're not allowed to touch anything, and they have the no harvest, no touch, no impact to the environment. That's kind of their philosophy and what they tell the public, like you can't gather there, even pick up a rock to take home, because if you think about the number of people that visit the park every year, if people are to take things, they won't be there for the next. So just to think about the idea of gaining access to just this very specific plant, there was a lot of criteria that we had to explore, and she pretty much had to do the research on her own, and she enlisted the help of a group of sweetgrass harvesters and just general community members to help on this project. And so over the course of learning about the grass and studying it, she came to see that through picking the grass, it actually helped the grass grow. So we would have harvest plots mapped out, and one year we would pick them, and before we picked them, she had to count every single individual blade of grass and mark that down, and that became part of the study. And then the next year we would come back, and she would have harvest people within the community who regularly harvest sweetgrass as a part of their kind of practice. And when we the next year harvested, that would get counted, how much people took and things like that. And over the course of the study, we found that it grows back, and I think I don't want to say numbers, but it was at least 25 to 40% more growth when picking. So we found out that the grass actually, it was a good relationship that was practiced for years. And so pretty much through that process of working on the Sweetgrass Harvest Project, we applied to the Park Service, and I believe we have been approved to then dole out permits within our tribal systems to tribal members who request a permit to harvest. And so it still has to be done under very strict circumstances, but I believe we have approval. And so that's a big deal for a lot of community members that don't have access. And the biggest thing through this process learning was kind of thinking about ways of knowing and about different types of science, and thinking about indigenous knowledge having valid information, and people having these protocols, oral stories, and different traditions that carry information. And through the course of handing that information down from person to person, that information has a lot to do with the environment and places we live. And so I think maybe learning about that helped me see how maybe there isn't just one way of knowing through science, that there's other ways of knowing and other ways to carry on information. And so that has been a really great discovery. And so the other thing that we do within the practice in general, besides harvesting sweetgrass, is also harvesting our own ash. And when I was first starting to weave baskets, I had a really hard time getting brown ash. There just weren't as many people harvesting or preparing it for weavers. And so when I discovered how scarce it was, I kind of went down the rabbit hole deciding to learn how to do that myself. And so with the help of my partner, we've now pretty much, we went out with a couple of elders and learned how to harvest the brown ash. And so we'll go out into the woods and look for a tree. Just sourcing the tree is also information that's really vital, passed from tradition or passed from person to person. And the major thing about ash trees is they grow in like swampy locations. So there's only certain areas where they like to grow, and then within those areas you're looking for very specific qualities of a tree that's good for weaving. So they usually have to have very straight grains, not a lot of branches, and then you also have to look at the environment and the soil of where it's growing and make sure there aren't other competing trees, because that can impact the wood as well. And so since then, we've been harvesting our own ash, and so that, takes a lot more time, but I then have more material to work with. And I think when it comes to a lot of the baskets, your finished product is really only as good as the material that you're working with a lot of times. When it comes to the ash anyway, if you have grains that are really wavy, it's harder to do the type of techniques that I do. So we're usually looking for very specific trees. And this is actually an example of Jeremy Frey, who had an exhibit at the Portland Museum of Art last year. This is a video of him pounding the ash, and I'll play it. You can hear it. Cute because you can hear one of our community members, one of our elder basket makers.
That's a surprise.
Yeah, you can tell she was really excited about that tree. It was really good wood. So usually, we go out and we harvest the tree, and then the tree gets pounded continuously until the growth rings start to separate, and then you can see that it peels right off after it's pounded enough, which is, it will tell you when it's ready to pull off just by separating. And so this is kind of more examples of that, what that kind of looks like with the strips, the splints peeling off. And so each one of those splints, they will usually have, or they always have, a rough side on both sides of it. And that rough material has to be scraped off, or I can take one splint and, I think it's out of order. No, I guess I didn't include that one. I'll take one splint and use a tool that I have, which is all the way down here, all the way on that, probably hard to see, but so that tool, I can take one piece of ash, thread that up through, and then take that and split it all the way down into two pieces. And then on the inside of that piece is a lot smoother, and then on the outside it's still rough. And so I will then scrape off that rough part, and then I can take a tool and cut the strips individually. And I did bring a couple. This is just one little tiny strip, but so this material has been fully processed, where it's basically all of the rough part has been scraped off, and then I take it's called a gauge, and I cut them into little strips. And the other thing is, I sometimes use scissors to cut the strips because the gauge can leave like little splinters, and I'm kind of particular about it, and so I will usually just cut my pieces by hand with scissors, and then I will take those pieces and dye them in different colors. And the dyes that I use, although traditionally we would use more of the like natural dyes, when the aniline dyes were invented, I think everybody who made baskets was really intrigued to try them. And so for the most part, even when I was taught, we used fabric dye or textile dyes to colorate our wood. And that's mostly because the colors that you can achieve with the textile dyes just are a lot more vibrant and colorful and contemporary. And so for me, I really enjoy sort of having a contemporary color juxtaposed with a natural traditional material. I really love that contrast because I think it reflects me and my experience as a basket maker and as an indigenous person living in a contemporary time. So I just really love to play with color, and that's one of the funnest parts for me. And before I started making baskets, I also painted. I grew up painting and was always into art, always was probably the artist of my family. And even in high school, when I was attending school at Deer Isle High School, we had the community program and had a chance to work or to attend Haystack as a kid. And even now, when I look upon that experience, that really shaped me as an artist. Just having the time to work on your art all day was like something special that I'd never had before. And so I was like, this is what I want to do. And I now look back, and I didn't even think about it in hindsight, but I am still practicing things that I learned at Haystack, way back when I was in high school. I did a weaving on a loom workshop, and this was before I learned basket making. And then I also worked with recycled materials, so found objects, and I'm still doing that today. One of the things about ash, it's a beautiful material. There's really nothing like it. I have went and done an experiment and tried to harvest white ash to see if that would process the same. And although it splits exactly like the brown ash, you can peel it off, you can pound it, all the things. It looks exactly the same. However, it's more brittle. It doesn't have the same flexibility. For some reason, brown ash has this some sort of molecular structure where it's very flexible and has a greater elasticity than a lot of other woods. So the biggest issue that we have now coming on the horizon with our brown ash is the threat of the emerald ash borer beetle. And if you haven't heard of that, basically it's a beetle that came from Asia. It came in on shipping pallets, and the beetle quickly found all the ash and flocked to it, and then just has since then destroyed tens of thousands of trees all the way across like the Great Lakes region, and it has moved and been detected, unfortunately, in Maine recently. And so that kind of knowing that beetle was on the horizon, it has been a threat to like our processes, our basketry, traditions, and all that. So we do have some organizations that are working to learn more about it and figure out how to combat that beetle to keep it from moving or destroying all of our trees here in Maine. So we do have like the Forest Service, and the Forest Service works with our tribes to try to develop ways to combat that. And so we'll see what happens, but the beetle luckily doesn't move on its own. It has to be moved by people. And it only has about a 2-mile radius on its own. That's as far as it usually will fly. And a lot of times it just sticks close to where it decides to lay its eggs. But the biggest thing is that it will lay its eggs in the tree, and then the larva will hatch, and those larvae will basically just start burrowing through into the wood and destroy the tree's access and ability to take water up. So that's really how it destroys the tree. But hopefully there will be some actions or preventative measures to prevent that from happening. However, in the meantime, I'm sort of thinking about other materials and alternative ideas of which to still practice tradition and be able to carry that on and show the next generation, but still work with something else that's potentially viable. And so I have done some experiments with natural materials and have worked with some weavers from Alaska that work with cedar, and so I've learned some about their cedar traditional harvesting and processing over time. And I've also learned that we have cedar that processes the same and can use the exact same techniques on the cedar that we have here, and that creates a really beautiful weave. It's not at brown ash, but I think right now I'm kind of using it as different features within work. And so you can see the cover on the top one and the cover of all these acorns, that is cedar. And so the other material I've played around with is corn husks, and so you can see on the edge those are natural corn husks that I've sewn into a basket. This one over here, a friend of mine, Gio, made that piece, and those pieces are ash. So this was kind of my alternative to using ash for the husks. And I've also thought about other ways that I can kind of incorporate my other skills, and thinking I love painting. So these are some of my pieces where I incorporated my painting with my basketry, and always inspired by like nature. And that's where a lot of my colors I think come from. And so moving forward, I've been thinking about, what would happen if we lost the ash and we didn't have access to that material anymore? What could we use? And what could we potentially use to simulate ash, to follow the same exact steps or practices in the techniques that we use? How could we still have the same exact techniques employed into a work without the ash? And so this has been a few years in the making, since also the Kindling Fund grant that I received was all to kind of help spur ideas and allow for exploration into these new materials. And so I've really been playing with found objects. I'm really into the idea of recycling and taking materials that do not impact the environment, or that reclaim items that would otherwise be destined for the landfill, and playing with those. And so these pieces, the one furthest over, that one was one of the first works I did, and that one was made out of fabric and laminated paper. So I just stacked various layers of medium, whether it was fabric or paper, and then I was able to simulate the same kind of feel as the ash. That's what I was looking for, was something that felt like the same type of elasticity and movement and pliability. And then I also found wallpaper. Wallpaper worked really well for the little points, little gray points. And then just any type of found material I just experimented with. And for this one, this is now currently in the permanent collection at the Farnsworth Museum in Rockland. And this piece I made from an old, it was a candle holder. It was actually a thing that I think people would put a candle in, and it was, I found it at the recycling center. And then I did the fabric laminated as my weavers, the ones going this way, and then for the points was another type of fabric that I heat pressed, a plastic layer, and that was able to weave just like almost indistinguishable from the ash. If you didn't know any better, you might think that it was. And then the latest piece I did was this one for Colby College, and that's in their permanent collection. And it was also part of an exhibit that I worked on. And so this one was made from aluminum flashing that you would put around the edge of like window frames for your external housing. My uncle did vinyl siding, and he had like a lot of scraps of vinyl and aluminum scraps that were not being used, and so I just asked if I could salvage those from him, and he said, "Go ahead." That's like it was his just junk, and so I spray painted those and came up with this. And then also this had wallpaper for the points. And so this was featured in this exhibit, which was, we had a reinstall of some old paintings that were by the TSA painters, a group of artists from the early 1900s who painted in the desert Southwest and were very inspired by Taos Pueblo and the communities in the Southwest. And so they had all these paintings that they did that depicted community members. And so we thought it would be nice to feature those works, the reinstall of those paintings with indigenous art. And so me, along with a group of other artists, were all commissioned to have work featured in this show. And it was kind of interesting because when people saw this piece featured, they would say, "Oh, was that inspired by the Southwest?" And I was like, honestly, I didn't think that it was, but because I had been working with everybody from that area, and I had, within our research for the exhibit, visited the Southwest and was spending a lot of time. I'd gone there like 3 times in 1 year, and I was like, inadvertently, I think that just came across through like my exposure to that, and it wasn't like an intentional thing, but it like worked really well with all of the Southwestern art that was shown. And so more recently, I've had the pleasure to be a part of other exhibits as well, and I'm really thankful that people, and especially like the broader art community, is starting to recognize and see our work as it is a fine art, and it's an art that a lot of times would be relegated as, traditional or cultural artifact or craft, but I think nowadays people are recognizing the artistry that's there. And so these were a few examples of some of the different exhibits that I was featured in. And now, what I've been putting a lot of my time into more recently has been curating and working within the museum space, doing exhibits. I'm also a board member at the Abbey Museum in Bar Harbor, and so I think the role of museums is really important. Any type of place where there's a collection, an archive of works, historical works. What's great about it is not only can we as community members access that collection to learn from and incorporate or bring back traditions that might be lost, but it's also a really great way to educate the general public about some of our work, because you think about the things that come through the Abbey Museum at Bar Harbor. Acadia has that millions of visitors throughout the season, and I don't think many people even realize that there are tribes here in Maine. I'm surprised all the time to hear that. And so I think my next move, I'm still working on my art and still developing new practices and processes, but I think I have a really strong inclination or desire and also feeling like a responsibility to work in the museum kind of field in order to just try to not only feature like the beautiful work that's within our community, but also spread this knowledge and share what the culture is about and different types of mediums and also ideas too. So the latest exhibit that I'm working on right now is this one, which is called, we have a title, it's called Maute, which is a Penobscot word for bound together, for being together, sitting together, and working together. And so I thought when I initially embarked on this project, it was about number one, being able to showcase artists in our community, but also allow the artists to kind of expand the types of work that they're creating. So not just, a lot of people, and even me, over time, I think people have an expectation or an idea in their head of what I make and what tradition looks like. And so a lot of us have a foundation in tradition, and that is the basis of what we practice, but we also have a contemporary practice that we like to either incorporate or just practice as art. And so I think this specific project has been a way to allow the artist to not so much have to cater to market demand and thinking more about expanding the types of work that they do. And so I really wanted to support allowing them to make whatever they wanted to make. And so we have 8 different artists a part of this group, and we also include an artist who their art form is song, and we have an artist whose art medium is moving picture, so video and cinematography, and then photography, and also blown glass and stained glass. And so we have a huge variety of mediums and artists that are kind of working in more contemporary, forward-thinking types of mediums. And this is kind of an example of some of the work that of theirs that will be featured. And so that's going to be in November. So a lot of my time has been devoted to that, but I'm still, of course, making my baskets and just trying to carry on that tradition, not only just to hold that information, but also I am very, I feel like privileged to carry that information and to be able to work with the material like that. And so that's pretty much what I do now is that and working for on the exhibit. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have. Yeah. Yes.
I just had a question about the beetles. They're very shiny and colorful. Could you grind them up to make like a type of dye?
I don't know. I haven't. Well, luckily I haven't seen any, so like I haven't had that opportunity. But I like where you're going with that because I more recently have been working with like cochineal, like the South American bug that's red and it's dyes beautifully, very purple red color. Also was used for like lipstick and rouge. So I've played with that, and so it is curious to think that I wonder if that metallic would work as well. Good question.
How long does it take to pound the ground out?
Yeah. I think the 2 most common questions I get, 2 things, is like how long it takes to pound and then how long it takes to make a basket. And I totally forgot to say that in my thing, so I'll answer that for you. So to pound a log, it can be done in 1 day. But a lot of times, the people that I know, it's very hard on your joints. It's just really hard labor. I don't personally pound it. Like I have people that are stronger than me to help, luckily. But Usually, we'll go and find the tree. I always go to the harvest locations and go try to find the tree with my partner. And so I look around. Once we locate one, we cut it down. So the harvest might be a day. We'll bring it home. Then pounding it might be 2 or 3 days, but it could be done in 1 day, in theory, if he was really like on it and wanting to get it done quickly.
Do you pound the actual
I
bark?
just noticed that
Yes.
when they pound the tree,
Yep.
the outer layers, I'm just wondering how far down into the tree can you go and pound and still get
Yeah.
usable material?
Yeah, so usually when we take it out, we'll leave the bark on it. And when they start pounding, the people that I know, they like to leave the bark on it for as long as possible because that will actually break some of the impact so that you're not pulverizing and crushing the wood itself. You're like kind of, the bark will be like kind of a buffer. And so we go all the way, we just pound from the outside all the way down until like the heart layer pretty much. Sometimes the heart can be more difficult to process. It doesn't split as nicely as the outer layers, but you actually go all the way from the, where the bark ends. The bark eventually kind of fluffs off as you pound. It just kind of dissipates, and then you're exposing the wood. And so you go all the way from wood, from the outside, all the way down to the center, into the heart, if you can. Because sometimes it gets to a point where it just doesn't want to split anymore. But, yep, pretty much the whole thing. Yes.
What kind of hammer or tool do you use?
Usually, like a rubber mallet would work really good, like the large rubber, like long-handled mallet, or traditionally a lot of people use like the blunt side of an axe. They'll use that, but for the most part, I think rubber or steel mallet. Yes.
What's the round part on that basket?
Oh.
Are those beads?
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. That is a deer antler. So for not everybody does this. It's not like traditional. It's more like my style of my own rendition of what I've added to the pieces. So it's deer antler. So almost 3/4 of mine will probably have the deer antler. It's become something that's now expected of me, and so I do that, and then also buffalo horn. I've been using that. That's really nice. It's like a black type of material. I'll see if I can find it. It's on these, the top one, and then these acorns. Those have that's what buffalo horn looks like, polished. But what's nice about the deer antler is it can be made from shed antlers, so we can just find them potentially. And then what we do is we cut them into discs with a bandsaw, slice them into round discs, and then drill a hole in the center with a drill, and then carve and polish it with a Dremel. So every single piece is carved and polished by hand with a Dremel, and yeah.
And the other part of the basket, the little round dots on there, the first basket of the...
Let's see. Oh, so these like little things that stick out, like these.
Circular.
Yep.
Are those beads or are they...
Hold on, I'll show you. Let's see. So those are actually twists of the wood. So, like I said, the wood is very fine, so you can twist the wood, and it will bend into shape. And basically, it's just doing that over and over and over again for the entire piece. And this one you can see in person if you want, when if people want to come up and look at things after. Yes.
So how long did it take to make that basket on the left?
Oh yeah, I forgot to answer that one. So okay, that one probably took me like a month to make. That large one. That's probably like the largest size that I do, and it was probably like this big. But I would every piece that I make, I start really fine. So regardless of the size, I usually always work in the same scale. So if you'll like look at the pieces that I have here, you'll see that I'll initially start with grass. I'll weave with grass, with one blade of grass, and then do a very fine weaver, and then it gradually tapers like wider as it goes up. And so it just, that's also why I cut it by hand. So like something like that, this probably took me like a week to make. Yeah. But smaller ones I can do in like 2 or 3 days. But if you count processing the material, dyeing the wood, all that, yeah.
What are those little tools you have there to the right of the baskets?
So these are blocks. So most of our works are made on a mold, for the most part. Some people weave freeform, but I prefer using a mold like that one. What's cool about that one actually is, so when you weave around something, you can see most of these still have the mold in them because they're works in progress. The ones that have the taper this way and go straight, these I can just pull from the basket and they'll come out easily like that. And the ones that go concave and start to curve back in, I actually need a special mold that comes apart in puzzle pieces for that. Because otherwise, once you weave around it, the weaving's so tight, it's stuck in there. Yeah. Yes?
Does the ash have to be wet?
So to split it, when I initially go to like process materials, if I'm getting ready to do a whole batch, I will take the dried splints. So after it comes off the tree, we will dry it because that's green wood, so it would be very wet and still. So instead of coiling it right then, we'll let it dry, and then we'll coil it and set it aside. And then when I'm ready to work, I take out those coils and I put them in a bucket and soak them. And then once they're fully soaked, then I can split them. And after the splitting and processing of it, once it's down into strips like this, then I don't have to wet it again until I weave with it. So when I weave with it, I will only apply the smallest drop of water. So as I'm weaving, I have like a little dish that has water in it, and I'll just dip my finger and then just wet the wood slightly, just enough to make it pliable to work with. And the reason I don't soak it is because the wood like expands a lot. So if I were to work with it when it's wet, the basket would be, the weave would not be as tight because it's expanded. So when it shrinks, you'd have all kinds of gaps in between every row. So I usually use the most minimal amount of water as possible. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ash has a lot of mythical qualities, and I know in the Celtic culture that there's a lot of myth around ash. Is that true in the indigenous cultures here as well?
Yeah, actually, I did, and it's funny because I had a slide on that, and I took it out for like shortening for other purposes. But yeah, so part of our, in Penobscot anyway, our tradition or stories tell like that we have a character called Glooskap, and that's one of the first people. And so the story goes that Glooskap, he shot an arrow into an ash tree, and then the ash tree opened up, and then people sprang out from it. And so that's the traditional story, yeah. But there's other ones too that involve the ash tree, yeah. But the most important is the one that was like the part of the creation story, yeah. Yes.
Is sweetgrass pretty common along the streams along here?
Well, you would think so. You would, because I see places all the time where I'm like, that looks like the perfect conditions. It looks exactly like this other spot that I harvest, and so I'll go, and I'm always looking for new spots, and so I'll go and I'll look around, and it's usually not. It's like a different type. But I also learned during one point in time when the cattle, when people had like a lot of like the farmlands and cattle, a lot of the marsh areas were used for the haying. And so I don't know if this, because this is something that like could be studied more and learned about, but I wonder if any of the hay grasses would be planted or if they would just use the native hay. I'm not really sure about that, but I'm also not sure if it would outcompete the sweetgrass. I don't know. But in terms of like its location and where it likes to grow, it usually is in like areas of like brackish kind of water. So streams and places close to the ocean that's not fully like, so like salt marshes, places like that. That's usually where it likes to, but for the actual locations that I know of, there's probably only like 5, off the top of my head, I know of like 5 places where it grows. Yeah, and I'm always looking for new places, and also thinking about if it hasn't been harvested for a long time, maybe it just needs to be harvested more in certain places, and it will grow back. I don't know. Maybe it used to be more common. I'm not sure.